Are we rolling? Yes, we are. What's up, guys? It's McKinley Crain here, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free review of WandaVision Season 1, Episode 8. This is the 8th episode of the most recent, MCU show, or you could say MCU series. That's like on Disney Plus. It's actually the first MCU Disney original. Not Disney original, my bad. Disney Plus original. Like MCU Disney Plus original to be released. What I mean by that is like it's the first MCU show that's a Disney Plus original. Not a Disney original, because you know they're like all Disney movies. But Disney Plus original. Anyway, and I love this episode. This episode was very different than I expected it to be. But that's not bad at all. That's not bad at all. It blew me away. This episode blew me away. It was just so powerful. It was just such a beautiful and such a powerful episode. It's a very heartbreaking episode too. It's like a very sad and very shocking episode too. All in a good way, of course. And I'll get into that after I tell you who stars in this episode and stuff. Anyway, so this episode stars Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda, aka Scarlet Witch. And she's the main character of this episode. Vision is in this episode a little bit. Yeah, so he's in this episode a little bit. But, not enough to be one of the main characters of this episode. He's one of the main characters of the show, but he's not one of the main characters in this episode. This is specifically a Wanda-centered episode, if you know what I mean. It's told from the perspective of Wanda. This episode also has other characters, other little characters, but the one that plays the biggest role besides the two main characters of the show, Wanda and Vision, is Agatha Harkness, who's played by Catherine Hahn. I think I pronounced her last name right. I'm not sure. I think I did. I can't tell you what role she plays in this series or this episode, because that would be a spoiler. So I can't do that. I'm sorry. But I can tell you that she has a big part of it. She has a big part of this. Is a big part of this episode, and is a big part of this series. Hopefully you've seen at least one episode of WandaVision while you're watching this to kind of figure out what I'm talking about. Or maybe you haven't and you're just watching this just to see if you want to start the series. I don't know. This is the 8th episode. I believe that we have one more WandaVision episode in Season 1 after this. Not sure if we'll get a season 2. If you look up WandaVision on Google, like, you know, Google lists it as a television miniseries, which means it's probably only going to last one season, which is kind of understandable if you think about it, like, kind of logical. But, you know, who wouldn't want a season 2? Because this show is just perfect. It's perfect. The acting is perfect. The story is perfect. Everything about this show and everything about this episode is perfect. I loved this episode. This was my favorite episode so far. I know I say that every time, but that's because these WandaVision episodes just keep getting better and better. I mean, they're all perfect, but, you know, some episodes are better than others, if you know what I mean. Like, I love this episode. This episode was actually a very dark episode. It's the darkest episode so far. It's even darker than episode 4. Yeah, it's pretty dark. Yeah, you heard me right. It's darker than episode 4. Which everybody was just like, oh, this episode is so dark. When it came out, everybody was like, oh, this episode is so dark. Well, this one's darker. But that's not a bad thing. The unique thing about this show that I've noticed is that it can be really, really, really lighthearted and really, really, really dark. And, you know, you might be thinking, how could like, you know, how could all that, like, you know, those dark moments and those light moments, like, you know, perfectly, like, you know, even out and, like, work? But they do. They work perfectly. They, like, correspond with each other, and they work perfectly. This episode, like I said, is a very heartbreaking episode. There's some very heartbreaking moments in there. And when a character feels, you know, like a certain, like, emotion in this episode, like, you can feel it with them. You feel it with them. You, like, feel it with them as if you were there. Like, you can feel their pain, you can feel their shock, you can feel their, like, you know, their grief. You can just feel, you can feel, like, you know, their anger or their rage. You can just feel that character's emotions. Or those characters' emotions. You can feel the characters' emotions. And all of the characters in this episode have great chemistry with each other. Of course, specifically Wanda and Vision. Well, especially Wanda and Vision. But, you know, all of the characters in this episode and in this show have perfect chemistry with each other. I love this episode, and I love this show. This episode, yeah, I am gonna, like, you know, say this again. This episode, you know, is very heartbreaking. Like, you know, there's some really heartbreaking moments in there, and you're probably just like, oh, like, they can't be that heartbreaking. Well, you'd be wrong. They are very heartbreaking, and sad, and, you know, depressing, but in a good way, if you know what I mean. And, you're probably just like, oh, well, how serious is it? Well, if you ever saw, like, some of these scenes, some of, like, you know, the heartbreaking scenes in this episode kind of reminded me of some of the heartbreaking scenes in the movie that came out, like, 6 months ago, which I saw and I loved, which was the Netflix original film, The Devil All the Time. And, you know, it had some really heartbreaking scenes in there, like, you know, depressing scenes. And, you know, this episode's, like, you know, heartbreaking scenes reminded me of that movie's heartbreaking scenes. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but, you know, you should. It's really good. It's not for everyone, but, you know, I love it. So, yeah, it's a pretty heartbreaking episode. I did not cry, but I did not cry during this episode, during the sad moments, because I don't cry. I don't cry during movies or TV shows. I'm just not a crier in general. But, you know, I was really sad. I was feeling like, you know, a lot of sadness and, like, you know, a lot of, like, sympathy and empathy for these characters, if you know what I mean. And, this episode will make you kind of hate certain characters in this show, like, you know, certain, like, minor characters in this show, more than you did. Like, it'll do that. And, this episode, like, you know, also reveals a lot about Wanda's past. And, you know, I love it. I think that, like, you know, I love, like, when it shows her past, you know, I love it. It's like very smartly executed, like, you know, very cleverly executed when it happens, and I love it. I absolutely, like, you know, adore this episode and adore this show. This episode had, like, a post-credit scene too. It has a post-credit scene, and, you know, it's a very shocking post-credit scene. Well, not, I wouldn't say shocking. I'd say, like, more surprising. It's a very surprising post-credit scene. That'll confuse you and engross you. It'll, like, you know, it'll make you go, like, what's gonna happen? What's happening? What's with that? What's with that? What's up with that? Why is it like that? What's going on? What's gonna happen? What are they doing? What are these people doing? Like, it'll make you think. It'll make you think. It'll make you curious. It'll make you super curious to see what happens in the next episode, which is the final episode of Season 1. And it could be the final episode of WandaVision altogether. Who knows at this point? Anyway, like I said, I absolutely, my bad. I absolutely adore this episode, and I adore this show. And, I love this episode's writing, and, you know, the few action scenes that were in this episode, and the special effects, and the ending, and the beginning, and just the whole episode. And I think I already said this, but funny thing about this episode is it does a lot of stuff you won't expect it to do. Like, this episode did, like, a lot of stuff I didn't expect WandaVision to do at all. But, you know, that's not a bad thing. You know, these were all perfect things and great things and smart decisions that they made for this show and for this episode. But, you know, I just wasn't expecting them. They were unexpected. Anyway, I'm going to give this episode a 100% out of 100%, which is the equivalent of an A+. Like, subscribe, join the notification squad, I will return.